I'll never forget the night my family's world changed forever. My grandfather, Henry Thompson, sold his cattle ranch for $3.8 million. He didn't keep a dime for himself. Every penny went to my father, James, because Grandpa trusted him more than anyone. His only request was simple. He looked at my dad with tired eyes and said, "Take care of me." That was it. That was the deal. But money has a way of showing who people really are. My dad promised he would keep Grandpa safe, that he'd make sure he never had to worry again. My mom, Susan, smiled and believed him because she always did. She was the kind of woman who stood by her husband no matter what. And then there was me, Ethan, watching everything unfold, trying to believe the best in my father, even when I started to notice cracks in the promise. For a while, it seemed like things were fine. But then came that one freezing winter night. My father, the man Grandpa had trusted with everything, pushed him out into the cold like he was nothing. That image is burned into my memory, my grandfather standing on the back porch with his old coat pulled tight, shivering, his breath turning to frost in the air while my father shut the door on him. I made a choice that night. I took my grandfather in when my own father wouldn't. And months later, when Grandpa passed away in my care, I thought the pain of losing him would be the hardest part of the story. I was wrong. Because when we sat in the lawyer's office to hear Grandpa's final wishes, something was revealed that left the entire room in silence. I grew up believing my grandfather, Henry Thompson, was the strongest man alive. He wasn't just a rancher. He was the heartbeat of our family. His cattle ranch stretched across miles of open land in northern Wyoming. The fences seemed endless, and the sky above felt bigger there than anywhere else in the world. I spent my childhood running across that land, feeding calves, chasing after barn cats, and listening to Grandpa's voice carry over the wind as he gave orders to the ranch hands. Grandpa was tough, but his toughness was paired with an incredible kindness. He never raised his voice at me. When I made mistakes, he didn't scold me. He guided me. Once, when I accidentally left the barn door open and a calf wandered out, I thought I was done for. But instead of yelling, Grandpa knelt down, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Ethan, a man learns best from mistakes. What matters is that you own it and fix it." We walked out together, brought the calf back, and I never forgot that lesson. My father, James, was different. He was ambitious, sharp, and always thinking about money. Where Grandpa saw land and cattle as a way of life, my father saw them as numbers. He grew up working the ranch, too, but he never seemed to love it. When I was a kid, I could see the resentment in him. He hated the long days, the dirt under his nails, the endless repairs, and the unpredictability of ranch life. Mom used to tell me that Dad dreamed of getting out, of having something bigger, something easier. He didn't want to live the way his father had. Mom, Susan, balanced the two men in my life. She was quiet but strong in her own way. She stood by Dad, but she adored Grandpa. She grew up in a small town nearby and married Dad young. She often said Grandpa felt like the father she had lost too soon. She would sit with him on the porch in the evenings, sipping sweet tea while the sun went down, listening to his stories as if they were treasures. I was 22 when everything started to unravel. Grandpa was in his 70s, and though his spirit was unshakable, his body was slowing down. Years of early mornings, hard labor, and Wyoming winters had taken their toll. I noticed the way his hands trembled when he lifted a coffee cup and how his steps grew shorter. He pretended he was fine, but I knew better. He was proud, and pride runs deep in men like him. Then came the day he made the choice none of us expected. He gathered us around the kitchen table, his voice steady but serious. "I'm selling the ranch," he said. The words landed like a thunderclap. I looked at him, stunned. That land had been in our family for generations. It wasn't just a home. It was a legacy. My father's eyes lit up immediately, though, and I saw something in his expression I couldn't quite describe at the time. "Dad, are you sure?" Mom asked gently. "I'm sure," Grandpa replied. "The ranch deserves better than to fade under my hands as I grow old, and I want to make sure the people I love are taken care of." Weeks later, the papers were signed, and the ranch was gone. When the sale closed, Grandpa called us into the lawyer's office. I sat beside him as he handed over every penny, all $3.8 million, to my father. Grandpa didn't keep a single cent for himself. He placed his entire future in my father's hands. "James," he said softly, looking my dad straight in the eye, "I'm giving this to you. I don't need wealth for myself. All I ask is that you take care of me. That's all I want." My father smiled, clapping his dad on the shoulder. "Of course, Dad. You'll never have to worry. You've earned this rest." On the surface, it seemed like a perfect arrangement. My father now had money to build the future he wanted, and Grandpa could relax after a lifetime of sacrifice. But deep down, something didn't sit right with me. I remembered the look in Dad's eyes when the money landed in his lap. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't love. It was hunger, the kind of hunger that blinds men to everything else. Still, I tried to convince myself that maybe I was overthinking it. I told myself Dad would honor his word. Grandpa trusted him, and if Grandpa could trust him, then maybe I could, too. I focused on my own life, working odd jobs and trying to save for college. But I kept one eye on my father and how he handled his new fortune. At first, things looked fine. My father bought a bigger house, a nicer truck, and new furniture for my mom. He made investments and spoke proudly of building a future for our family. He even set Grandpa up in the guest room of the new house. But little by little, the cracks began to show. Dad's patience with Grandpa grew thinner. The once respected man who had given up everything became, in my father's eyes, nothing more than a burden. I didn't realize it then, but that decision to hand over everything would be the spark that lit a fire of betrayal none of us could put out. Grandpa had trusted his son with all he had. He thought love would be enough. He thought blood would mean loyalty. What he didn't know was that the same blood could also run cold. And soon we would all learn just how cold my father's heart could become. At first, I tried to believe my father would live up to his promise. Grandpa had given him everything, and surely that had to mean something. For a little while, it even seemed like it did. Grandpa settled into the guest room of our new house, and Dad made a point of telling people he was taking care of his father. He said it proudly at church, at family gatherings, even to neighbors who stopped by to see the new truck parked in the driveway. But behind closed doors, the truth was different. The first cracks appeared in small ways. Dad would sigh loudly whenever Grandpa asked for help with simple tasks like reaching a glass from the cabinet or getting his medicine. "You can do it yourself," Dad would mutter under his breath, though he thought no one was listening. But I heard him, and so did Grandpa. I saw the hurt flicker in his eyes, though he tried to hide it with a weak smile. One evening after dinner, Grandpa accidentally spilled water across the table. My father's reaction was instant and cruel. "For God's sake, Dad, can't you even hold a cup anymore? You're like a child." Mom tried to smooth things over, wiping the spill and gently saying it was no big deal. But the damage was done. Grandpa sat in silence, staring down at his weathered hands, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. As weeks passed, my father's frustration turned into something sharper. He began staying out late, telling Mom he was busy with business meetings. When he was home, he made excuses to avoid being around Grandpa. I started to notice how he referred to him not as Dad, but as the old man. It chilled me. This was the same man who had given him millions, the man who had built the foundation of our family, reduced to a burden in his own son's eyes. One night, I confronted Dad. I found him sitting in his office, papers spread across the desk. "Why are you treating Grandpa this way?" I asked. "He gave you everything. Don't you think you owe him respect?" Dad looked up at me, his eyes cold. "Respect doesn't pay bills, Ethan. He chose to give me the money. That was his decision. I didn't force him. And now he expects me to put my whole life on hold to babysit him. I won't do it." The words hit me like a punch. "He's your father," I said quietly. "One day you'll regret this." Dad leaned back in his chair and laughed bitterly. "Regret doesn't build futures either. You're young. You'll understand someday. Life isn't about sentiment. It's about progress. And sometimes progress means leaving the weak behind." I walked out of that room sick to my stomach. I wanted to believe there was still some shred of love left in him, but his words echoed in my head for days. The final straw came during the coldest week of winter. The snow outside piled high, and the wind howled against the house. The heating system struggled to keep up, and every room felt like ice. That night, I woke to raised voices coming from downstairs. I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. "I'm tired of this, Dad," my father shouted. "I've done enough. You can't even get through a night without complaining. I'm not your nurse. You're dragging this family down." Grandpa's voice was shaky but firm. "I gave you everything I had, James. All I asked was a roof and a little kindness. Is that too much for a son?" My father's reply was venomous. "Yes, it is. I didn't ask for this responsibility. I didn't want it. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." I heard the back door swing open and the rush of freezing air pour inside. I bolted down the stairs just as my father shoved Grandpa out onto the porch. The old man staggered, clutching his coat tight, his breath rising in white clouds. My father's face was stone as he said, "Find somewhere else to go." Then he slammed the door shut. For a moment, I stood frozen in the kitchen, my heart hammering in my chest, torn between the father who had raised me and the grandfather who had taught me what love really meant. The silence was unbearable. Then Grandpa turned, his eyes meeting mine through the glass. His lips were blue, his body shaking from the cold. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I grabbed my coat and ran outside, wrapping my arm around him. "You're coming with me," I said firmly. He tried to protest, whispering, "I don't want to be a burden, Ethan." But I wouldn't hear it. "You're not a burden. You're my family, and I'll take care of you the way you took care of me." Behind us, the lights inside the house flickered, shadows moving across the curtains where my father stood watching. I didn't care. That night, I chose my grandfather over my father. I chose love over greed. And I knew that choice would change everything. When I led Grandpa away from that porch into the freezing night, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. I didn't think about money, about family politics, or about the risks of defying my father. All I thought about was the man shivering beside me, the man who had carried me on his shoulders as a boy, who had taught me to mend fences and drive cattle, who had given his only son everything he owned in exchange for a promise of care. That promise had been broken, and I wasn't going to let him face the cold alone. We walked to my beat-up truck parked at the curb. The engine coughed to life as I cranked the ignition, and the heater groaned, barely pushing out warm air. Grandpa sat beside me, bundled in his old coat, his hands trembling, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion. For the first few miles, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people carrying wounds that words could not immediately heal. Finally, Grandpa broke it. His voice was low, almost ashamed. "You don't have to do this, Ethan. I won't hold it against you if you take me back." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "I'm not taking you back. You're staying with me. You deserve better than what he did to you tonight." He shook his head slowly. "I never thought I'd see the day my own son turned me out. Maybe I was a fool for trusting him." I looked over at him, his face worn and tired in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "You weren't a fool, Grandpa. You believed in him because he was your son. That's not foolish. That's love. But he made his choice, and now I'm making mine." I brought him to my small apartment above the hardware store where I worked part-time. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a bathroom, but it was warm, and it was ours. I gave him my bed that night and slept on the couch. He tried to argue, but I wouldn't hear it. "You raised me to be a man," I told him. "This is what a man does." The weeks that followed were hard. Supporting both of us meant picking up a second job at the gas station down the road. I worked long hours stocking shelves, pumping fuel, and running deliveries. Money was tight, but I stretched every dollar. Groceries were simple: beans, rice, bread, and the occasional meat when I could afford it. Grandpa never complained. In fact, he often apologized. One evening, as I set down 2 bowls of soup on the table, he said quietly, "I feel like I'm dragging you down, Ethan. You should be out living your life, not stuck here taking care of me." I sat across from him and shook my head. "You're not dragging me down. You're giving me a reason to push harder. Taking care of you isn't a burden. It's an honor. You've given me more than I can ever repay. This is the least I can do." Tears welled in his eyes, and he quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. "You're more of a son to me than my own boy has been in years." That moment cemented our bond in a way I hadn't expected. We became a team, navigating our new life together. During my breaks, I'd take him for short walks around the block. His steps were slow, but he never stopped trying. On days when I was home, we'd sit by the window, and he'd tell me stories about the ranch, about the early mornings branding cattle, the storms that nearly swept away entire herds, and the nights he spent under the stars with nothing but a blanket and his horse for company. "Those were hard times," he said one afternoon, his voice filled with nostalgia. "But I'd take them again in a heartbeat. Hard work makes a man proud. Easy living makes him soft." I listened, soaking in every word. I realized then that these weren't just stories. They were lessons passed down like heirlooms. He wanted me to carry the spirit of the ranch, even if the land was gone. As winter turned to spring, I noticed his health declining. The tremors in his hands grew worse, and some days he struggled to get out of bed. Still, he never once complained. He'd smile at me when I came home from work, even if his body ached. And every night before bed, he'd say, "Thank you, Ethan. You'll never know what this means to me." I knew then that my decision had been the right one. I couldn't change my father's choices, but I could honor my grandfather with mine. What mattered wasn't the size of our home or the balance in our bank account. What mattered was that he knew he wasn't alone, that someone still saw his worth. It wasn't easy. There were days I thought I couldn't keep going, days when exhaustion nearly crushed me. But then I'd look at Grandpa sitting in the chair by the window, humming an old country tune, and I'd remember why I was doing it. He wasn't just my grandfather. He was my teacher, my friend, my family. And no matter what, I was going to stand by him until the end. That choice, simple as it seemed, became the turning point of my life. I didn't realize it then, but every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every bowl of beans and rice we shared was leading us to a moment that would shake my family to its core. Because when Grandpa's time came, and his final wishes were revealed, the decision I made to take him in would change everything. The months I spent with Grandpa were the hardest and yet the most meaningful of my life. Every day, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing on me. But I also felt something else, something deeper. I felt proud that I was giving back to the man who had once given me everything. He didn't have the ranch anymore, but in those final months, he still had his dignity. I made sure of that. Then came the morning I dreaded most. The air in my apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, I would hear the shuffle of Grandpa's slippers on the floor or the soft coughs as he made his way to the table where I always left him coffee. But that morning, there was nothing. When I walked into the bedroom, I found him lying still, his hands folded across his chest, his breathing gone. I sank to my knees beside him. For a long time, I couldn't move. I wanted to believe he would wake up if I just waited, that this was another one of his naps. But when I touched his hand, it was cold. The tears came fast and heavy. I whispered through the sobs, "Thank you, Grandpa. Thank you for everything." His funeral was small but filled with people who respected him. Old ranch hands, neighbors, and a few distant relatives came to pay their respects. My father stood at the front with my mother, his face a mask of composure, but I could see his impatience in the way he checked his watch. He wanted this over with, wanted to move on to whatever business he thought was more important. I stood by Grandpa's casket, silent, remembering the stories he told me, the lessons he drilled into me, and the love he gave freely until the very end. After the funeral, we were summoned to the lawyer's office for the reading of Grandpa's will. The air was thick with tension as we sat around the polished oak table. My father leaned back in his chair, a smug look tugging at his mouth as if he already knew he would walk out of that room richer than before. My mother sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting nervously between us. I sat on the other side, still raw from grief, not caring about the money, only wanting closure. The lawyer, a gray-haired man with a calm, steady voice, cleared his throat and opened the envelope. Henry Thompson left specific instructions regarding his estate, he began. To his son, James Thompson, he left the $3.8 million from the sale of the ranch with the condition that he provide his father with care, shelter, and dignity until his passing. My father's smirk grew wider. He glanced at me as if to say, "See, it was always meant for me." But the lawyer wasn't finished. However, he continued, adjusting his glasses, Mr. Thompson also included a clause that has now been triggered. If at the time of his death Henry Thompson was not under the care of his son, but instead under the care of another, then the estate would immediately and entirely transfer to that person. The room went silent. My mother gasped. My father's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. The lawyer turned his gaze toward me. It is clear from both testimony and medical records that in the final months of his life, Henry Thompson resided with and was cared for by his grandson, Ethan Thompson. Therefore, by the terms of this will, the entire estate is to be transferred to Ethan. The words hung in the air like a hammer striking steel. My father shot up from his chair, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. He gave the money to me. That was his choice." The lawyer remained calm. It was his choice, yes. And it was also his choice to set conditions. He stated plainly, and I quote, "A fortune is wasted in selfish hands. Let it go to the one who shows me love when I have nothing left." He wrote those words himself. I sat frozen, my mind spinning. I had never thought about the money, never wanted it. All I wanted was to give my grandfather peace in his final days. And yet here I was, suddenly responsible for everything he had worked for, everything my father had squandered. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She turned to my father, her voice trembling. "James, he trusted you. He gave you everything, and you betrayed him." My father slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't over. I'll fight this." The lawyer shook his head. "You won't win. His instructions are airtight. He planned this carefully. He knew exactly what he was doing." For the first time in my life, I saw my father speechless. He sank back into his chair, his hands trembling, his pride shattered. The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone could feel the weight of Grandpa's judgment pressing down on us. As I left the office that day, papers in hand, I felt both overwhelmed and humbled. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't planned for it. But Grandpa had seen something in me worth trusting. He had chosen me, not for my strength or ambition, but for something far simpler, love. That realization hit harder than the money ever could. The inheritance wasn't just wealth. It was a responsibility, a message passed down from one generation to the next. And in that moment, I promised myself I would honor it. Walking out of that lawyer's office, I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. The folder in my hands held documents that changed everything, $3.8 million, a ranch's worth of blood, sweat, and years. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy, like carrying the weight of my grandfather's last words. He had trusted me, not because I wanted the money, but because I chose him when no one else did. My father refused to speak to me after that day. He stormed out of the office and didn't look back. For weeks, he avoided me entirely. When he finally did face me, his words were bitter. "You think you earned this, Ethan? You didn't. He manipulated you, used you to punish me." I didn't argue. There was no point. Nothing I could say would cut through the bitterness in his heart. Deep down, I think he knew the truth. Grandpa hadn't left him behind out of spite. He had given him a chance to prove his love, and Dad had thrown that chance away. Mom struggled. She loved my father, but she also loved Grandpa. I could see the conflict tearing her apart. One evening, she came to my apartment. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly, her eyes red from crying. "Your grandfather was right about you," she said softly. "You have his heart. You gave him the care he needed when no one else would. I don't know what your father will do, but I want you to know I'm proud of you." Her words brought me more peace than the inheritance ever could. She saw me. She understood. With the estate now in my name, I had to make decisions. I could have bought a new house, new cars, or lived a life of comfort. But every time I thought about using that money for myself, I heard Grandpa's voice in my head, "A man's worth isn't in his land, Ethan. It's in how he treats his family." I knew then what I had to do. The first step was honoring him in a way that would last. I bought back a portion of the ranch land that had been sold off, not the whole spread, but enough to keep a piece of his legacy alive. I restored the old barn, the one where he had taught me to saddle a horse and mend a fence. I placed a plaque at the entrance with his name, not to show off wealth, but to remind everyone who stepped foot there of the man who built it with his bare hands. Next, I created a scholarship fund for local kids from ranching families. Grandpa always said the future belonged to the young, and too many families struggled to give their kids opportunities beyond the ranch. With part of the inheritance, I made sure those kids could pursue education, whether it was agriculture, veterinary science, or anything else that helped them chase their dreams. Every scholarship awarded carried Grandpa's name. The rest of the money I handled carefully. I kept enough to secure my own life, but I lived simply. I didn't want to become like my father, chasing status and possessions. I wanted to live in a way that would make Grandpa proud, a way that showed money was just a tool, not a measure of worth. As for my father, his anger never faded. He saw my choices as a betrayal, proof that I had taken his rightful place. I tried to reach out more than once, offering help, trying to mend what was broken, but he always turned me away. "Keep your charity," he snapped once. "I don't need your pity." It hurt, but I learned to accept that some wounds don't heal when pride stands in the way. Mom visited me often. She spent time at the ranch land I restored, walking the fields, sitting on the porch, and telling me stories of her younger years with Grandpa. She found peace there, and so did I. Together, we kept his memory alive. Looking back, the lesson is clear. Money can reveal the truth about people. It can show their greed, their fear, or their love. My grandfather's wealth didn't corrupt him. It didn't make him selfish. It gave him a chance to test the people closest to him. My father failed that test. But in his failure, I found a calling. Grandpa's final wish wasn't just to leave me an inheritance. It was to leave me with the responsibility of carrying his values forward. Respect, kindness, and love were worth more than any dollar amount. He trusted me to remember that when others forgot. Sometimes late at night, I sit on the porch of the restored barn, staring up at the same endless Wyoming sky we used to share. I hear his voice in my memory, calm and steady, reminding me of the lessons he gave me as a boy. "A man's worth isn't in his land, Ethan. It's in how he treats his family." And in those moments, I realized that the true inheritance wasn't the money at all. It was the love he left behind, the lessons he planted in my heart, and the example he set until his very last day. That is what I carry forward. That is what I will pass on when it's my time to leave something behind. That was my story. It wasn't easy to live through, and it wasn't easy to share. But I believe my grandfather's lessons deserve to live on. If you felt something while listening, if this story touched you in any way, then I ask you to keep his legacy alive with me. Like this video so more people can hear stories that matter. Share it with someone who might need a reminder about the value of love and respect. Leave a comment and tell me what lesson you took away, or share a story about someone in your life who left an impact like my grandfather did. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and join me on this journey. Thank you for listening.